Hello everyone, I welcome you back to another important lecture. And for today, we will look on toward the major phenomena that are the part of the sexual reproduction in case of the human beings. And we will look on toward the process of implantation. We will see that how the pregnancy is carried on in the female individuals and what are its developmental phases. Later, we will see that how come the exchange of the materials this is brought in between the mother and the growing fetus. So let us begin with the first mechanism, and that goes with the title of implantation. And this implantation process that we have got with us, so this comes after the fertilization. If you were to be recalling the previous class, so I showed you that here we have got these ovaries in the female reproductive tract, and surrounding these ovaries, we have got these funnel shaped structures with us. And these funnel shaped structures that we had with us, so they were referred to as the oviducts. And onwards, when I continued making this female reproductive tract, so here we had this uterus with us, and downward we would have this cervix with us, and immediately beneath that we used to have the birth canal or the vaginal canal. In the fertilization, the scenario was that the egg cell which was released from the ovaries, so this was fertilized by the sperm cell, and following the fertilization we made a diploid cell out of it, and that diploid cell, this was referred to as the zygote, we say. Since we have to be increasing the size of the zygote, so I compelled it to be undergoing the mitosis process. And as a result of that, we were making a ball of cell out of it, and this ball of the cell that we have got, so this was entitled as the embryo, we say. Now, this embryo, in today's class, we are going to be taking it or to be moving it toward the soft inner lining of the uterus that we call this as the endometrium. And I would embed this embryo into this uterine lining, the soft inner lining of the uterus. And we will see that how that would be taking this embryo to be developing into a full grown baby that would be born after a period of 9 months. So if I were to be simply telling you that what implantation is, so this implantation would be that major process where the embryo that we have got, so this would embed itself or it would attach itself to this lining of the uterus that is the endometrium with us, and this is the soft inner lining that would have a lot of blood supply in it. Now, since the embryo has to grow, that means that it needs to be increasing its number of cell, and it also has to develop where this has to become complex. So this needs the nutrients. So this requires the glucose and the amino acids and the stuff like that. So for that purpose, this embryo would start to grow the blood capillaries out of it, and these blood capillaries would allow it to be directly be attached with the uterine lining, and with the help of these blood capillaries, this embryo would start to receive the nutrients. And at this point, where this embryo has embedded and it has started to grow the blood capillaries out of it, so this is the implantation. And following this point, we say that the female individual has become pregnant. If I was to be telling you that what is the importance of implantation, so the idea is very simple that following implantation, this embryo, this is going to start receiving the nutrients and the oxygen gas and that it would receive from the mother's body. And this embryo would utilize it to be growing and to be developing. Okay, and when I say that the embryo has started to grow, so in that context, the embryo would increase its number of cells. And when I am saying that the embryo would be undergoing the development, so by the development, we simply mean that the growing embryo would become more and more complex, and by more complex, what we mean is that it would start to be developing some specialized organs like the heart and the bones and the muscles and the stuff like that. So, since the female individual following implantation has become pregnant, so we must see that what this pregnancy actually is. So, what we regard in case of the human being is that this is the period of time that we count from the fertilization that happens in the oviduct until when the fetus would be born. And the other name that we give to the pregnancy is the gestation period. And in case of the human beings, this continues for the total of 9 months. And this gestation period, this varies from animal to animal or from species to species, but for us, the human beings, it is continued for the total of 9 months. And we are going to be looking on toward that how come the growth and the development it would happen during the pregnancy. So if you remember from above, so what we saw was that this embryo that we have got initially, this is directly attached to the uterus or to the uterine lining. But later, as the growth and the development would progress, so this embryo would detach itself from the uterine lining and it would start to be developing an other specialized organ, and that other specialized organ is what we regard this as the placenta, we say. Okay, so initially you see at this point that this embryo was directly attached, but now this has got detached and the placenta has been formed, and later there would be a formation of this structure that we call this as the umbilical cord, and there would be the development of this sac that I am highlighting for you, and this would be the amniotic sac. And as the embryo is getting detached, so ultimately this is also becoming complex. So within the amniotic sac, later this fetus would be enclosed, and that fetus it is also surrounded by the fluid around it, and that fluid is the amniotic fluid. So the point that we have to be noticing at this point is that now the fetus is not directly attached to the uterus, but rather than this is attached to the placenta with the help of this umbilical cord. And since this umbilical cord is attaching this fetus to the mother's body, so this has got the umbilical arteries and the umbilical veins. And we have total of two umbilical arteries and a total of two umbilical veins. But the umbilical arteries and the umbilical veins, they would be doing the opposite process. If I was to be carrying the deoxygenated blood from this fetus to the mother's body, so it would be done by the umbilical artery. But if I have to be carrying the oxygenated blood from the mother's body or from the placenta toward the fetus, so this would be done with the help of the umbilical vein. So now the context becomes easier for us to justify. Initially, the embryo was directly attached, then the placenta formed, and embryo separated itself from the uterus, and the fetus it got enclosed within the amniotic sac that we had here, and that amniotic sac would have this amniotic fluid in it. So this means that the fetus is now attached to the placenta with the help of the umbilical cord that we had here. And this umbilical cord had got two umbilical veins and the two umbilical arteries, but the umbilical veins they would carry the oxygenated blood from this placenta toward the fetus. And the umbilical arteries that we have got, so they would be carrying the deoxygenated blood from this fetus back toward the placenta or toward the mother's body. So if I was to be showing you the need diagram of it, so you have to be keeping this diagram in mind as it comes in the exam. And the idea is that here what we have is an unborn baby or immature baby, and this is the fetus. And this guy right here that we have got, So this is the umbilical cord that would have the umbilical arteries and the umbilical veins. And you see that this is going backward and this is getting attached itself to this organ. And this organ that we have, this is the placenta with us. And this part that is labeled here, so this is the mother's uterus or the uterine lining. And as I mentioned earlier, that there would be the presence of this fluid surrounding the fetus, and this is the amniotic fluid. And this amniotic fluid, this is available within the sac that is surrounding it, and that sac, this is the amniotic sac with us. Downwards, what we have at this point, this is the cervix, and beneath that, we have got the birth or the vaginal canal. Moving onward, what we have to be looking on is that how come the exchange of the various materials, this would be brought between the mother and the growing fetus that we have got. Now, the usual idea is that this fetus, which I'm referring to it as again and again, so you see that within the mother's reproductive tract, from 2 months onward, the unborn baby or the immature baby, this would be referred to as a fetus, and for the first 2 months following implantation, and even before the post fertilization, the ball of the cell, it would be the embryo with us. And we are aware of this fact that this fetus, since is a living organism, so this requires a continuous supply of the oxygen gas. It would need the glucose and the amino acid and the vitamin and the minerals, and at the same time, the growing fetus would also be producing the waste materials, and that includes the carbon dioxide gas, the urea, the uric acid, and the creatinine. And for the normal growth and the development, we need to bring about the exchange of the materials of these substances, like the useful materials, we would allow it to pass from the mother's into the fetus blood, and the waste materials, we would like them to be getting out of the fetus and be entering the mother's blood. So the mechanism that would be working at this point would be that it would be due to the diffusion process that we have got that would bring about the exchange of the materials. Now, if you were to be looking on this diagram, so what I see is that on toward this side, what we have, this is the growing fetus. And the growing fetus has got this umbilical cord, and that umbilical cord is attached to the placenta. Now, if we were to be looking at this point that we have zoomed on the other diagram, so you see that here, the one that is indicated with the bluish marking, so this is the umbilical artery with us, and this is bringing the deoxygenated blood, having a lot of waste materials from the fetus. On the other way around, if you were to see this blood vessel that we have here, which is indicated by the red, so this is the umbilical vein. So the idea would be that the deoxygenated blood, this would be going into these structures that we have with us, and these structures, they are referred to as a chorionic villi. And this chorionic villi or the chorionic villus, this has immense blood capillaries. In that immense blood capillaries, this would contain the deoxygenated blood from the fetus. Now, from the other way around, this part that we have got here, so this is actually indicating the maternal or the mother's blood supply. And in the maternal blood supply, we have got high amount of glucose, oxygen, amino acid, vitamin, and the minerals in the blood that was brought from the fetus. This has got low amount of the glucose, amino acid, vitamins, and the minerals, but has got a higher concentration of the waste materials in them. So as a result of that, there would be the presence of the concentration gradient difference between this fetal supply that we have and the mother blood supply that we have, and ultimately the exchange of the materials would be brought about by the glucose, amino acid, vitamin, and minerals, they would get out of the maternal blood and then they would diffuse into the fetal blood. On the other way around, the waste materials that we have with us, so they would diffuse from their higher concentration and ultimately they would go into the mother's blood. And if you were to just see here, there is close association between the mother's blood and the fetus blood, but they are not allowed to be mixing with one another. And thanks partly to the presence of this organ that we have here, and this was the placenta with us. So if I was to be indicating it and with the help of the points of the blood which is coming from the fetus, it has got high concentration of the waste materials that would have this, and it would have a lower concentration of the nutrient of glucose, vitamin, minerals, and amino acid. From the other way around, the maternal blood, it has lower concentration of the waste material and higher concentration of the nutrients and the oxygen gas. So as a consequence of that, the concentration gradient difference has got created between the mother's and the fetus blood. And the CO2 and other waste materials, they would diffuse from the fetus blood and they would ultimately come into the mother's blood. On the other way around, the glucose, amino acid, vitamin, and minerals, by being present in higher concentration in the mother blood, so they would get into the fetus blood. To the fetus, the blood would be returned with the help of the umbilical vein, and that would have all of these useful materials in it. So now, if I was to be telling you that how come the monthly development would be happening within the womb, so this does not comes in the paper as it is, but some of the idea would be taken. Before I take you into this, you need to be very much clear about the word development, and this development simply means that the growing fetus is becoming complex, complicated as the time goes on. And by the complexity, what we mean is that this would be developing some major organs, inclusive of the digestive system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, and the stuff like that. So you must know that this complexity or the development, this would be very fast during the initial months of the pregnancy. And toward the end of the pregnancy, we don't see any much development, only that the fetus would be growing in size. For the first month, the embryo that we have within the mother's body, so this is the size of the tadpole, and the heart of the embryo would start to beat. It would not develop the arms or the legs, but we see some little protrusions or the projections at those points where we would see that later the arms and the legs they would develop. In the second month, the embryo, which would now be called as a fetus, so this would develop the face, the toes, the fingers, arms, and legs. And from this time onward, this is the fetus with us now. And by the end of the 2 month, most of the organs they are formed within the fetus. In the third month, the fetus would develop the muscles and the nerves. In the fifth month, it would be getting the eyebrows and the fingernails and the fingerprints, and the mother in this month would start to feel the movements of the baby. In the seventh month, the development is almost complete, and by the eighth and the ninth month, we see no major development, but only that the fetus would grow in size. And at last, we have got something very major from the paper point of view, that the placenta that we had got as a barrier in between the mother and the fetus, so what role it contributes during the pregnancy phase. So this simply allows oxygen to move from the mother into the fetus blood. The other thing is that any of the CO2 or the waste material, it would allow it to diffuse from the fetus into the mother's blood. This also helps the transfer of some other excretory products, again from the fetus to the mother, and at the same time, this placenta that we have with us. So, this would not allow the transmission of any pathogens. Fetus has to be protected from the pathogens. So, what this placenta would do, that it would allow the antibodies to get from the mothers into the fetus body, and by that, the fetus would be developing the passive immunity. Other than that, the uterine lining, we need to be keeping it thick during the pregnancy phase so the abortion do not occur. So thanks partly again to the placenta that this releases the progesterone hormone, and that progesterone hormone would keep the walls of the uterus thick and would prevent the abortion. And the last point that we have with us is that maybe the fetus have a different blood group to the mother. So at any cost, we would never allow them to mix. If they would mix, so it can kill the fetus. So the placenta, it prevents the mixing of the mother's and the fetus blood. Although this brings the fetus and the mother's blood supply in close association, but it never allows them to mix with each other. At the last, we have to be seeing that what role the amniotic sac and the amniotic fluid performs during the pregnancy. So the fetus has to be supported. So thanks partly to these two structures that they provide support to it. Since during the pregnancy phase, the mothers they need to walk, and there is quite a chance that they can get some kind of a mechanical injury or mechanical shock. So the amniotic sac and the amniotic fluid would protect the fetus from such. The fetus temperature has to be regulated and maintained. So this amniotic fluid would be maintaining the temperature of the fetus as well. Likewise, from the fifth month onward, when the fetus has to be moving within the uterus, so the amniotic fluid would allow it to be moving within the womb. Likewise, this amniotic fluid also maintains the water balance within the uterus where the fetus is suspended, and that would be preventing the fetus from getting dehydrated. And you would be amazed to know that when the fetus is developing within the mother's womb, so it keeps on swallowing the amniotic fluid, and that is important for the development of their digestive tract. And last, the same amniotic sac and the amniotic fluid they provide a sterile environment to the growing fetus, so it does not get attacked by any of the pathogen. So I hope all these phenomena concerning the sexual reproduction in humans would be clear to you all.